we are going to be facing a dire situation unlike anything this country's ever faced. And it's almost as certain as we know we're eventually going to pass. And I don't see any easy or palatable solution that this country is prepared to take for that. And I think other countries recognize that and it's going to accelerate that program, because in order to keep borrowing money, they're going to want a higher interest rate to compensate for the risk of not getting their money back.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for November 6th through November 13th, 2023, while supplies last. This week we feature 3 different specials: 1-ounce silver kangaroos at $3.10 over spot, 5-gram platinum PAMP bars at $25 over melt, and 2.5-gram gold Valcambi bars at $25 over melt. First, the 2023 silver kangaroo from Australia are renowned for their 4/9 fine purity, as well as their recognizability and design. Like many other coins, they come 25 to a tube. However, unlike others, the Australian Monster Box is just 250 coins, making it the most affordable Monster Box available, especially with a premium of just $3.10 over spot per ounce. Next, we have the 5-gram platinum bar from PAMP Swiss Mint at just $25 over melt. Many consider platinum to be highly undervalued at the moment, since over the last 30 years, platinum has generally been significantly more expensive than gold, but currently sits at less than half the spot price, and PAMP is one of the top mints of Switzerland, giving you access to a premier bar in a premier metal at one of the lowest prices in 20 years. Finally, from another great Swiss mint, Valcambi, comes a 4/9 fine 2.5-gram gold bar. The small size of a 2.5-gram bar gives you excellent flexibility and liquidity, while the Valcambi name provides great trust, and all at just $25 over melt. All our specials this week are IRA eligible, and if you'd like to learn more about a precious metals IRA, call us, and we'll be happy to help you in that process. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Peter Grandich from Peter Grandich and Company. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always my pleasure, Elijah.
Well, it's great to have you today. You recently posted an article on Zero Hedge and also a video on YouTube explaining that this announcement that you made was kind of the most important one you've made in 40 years. And you talked about the national debt and the precarious situation we're in right now, where the interest on the debt itself is going to be over $1 trillion. Can you expand on why this is so concerning right now?
Well, it was concerning enough for me to take the time earlier this week to make a personal video to my clients, to my friends, and anybody that still cares to follow me, that we have reached a stage where I really believe it's truly out of control. You know, years ago, we talked in when we were in the single digits of trillions of debt, which we thought was enough. And we would talk about a time coming when we could be facing a real problem because of that debt. Well, that has arrived. Not only are we approaching 34 trillion in hard debt, not counting, still we need to come up with money for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid payments, which could be double or triple of that when it's totaled up. But we're now seeing multi-trillion-dollar budget deficits. And there is one last small piece of Washington, D.C., where there's still some sort of bipartisanship. And that's called the Congressional Budget Office. Because right now, politicians, we have a two-party system here in the U.S., and the two parties cannot go in a room together and really work together anymore. But within their own parties, they have a separate fraction that can't work within the party. And that's going to be the group that's going to be called upon to supposedly one day put this house in order. We see the Congressional Budget Office earlier this year issue a warning that at the pace we were growing at that point, we were going to hit $50 trillion in less than 10 years. Because of the acceleration of the budget deficit spending now, they now say it can be as soon as 6 or 7 years. Elijah, most people watching this video, God willing, are going to be alive when that time arrives. And what they need to ask themselves and their financial advisors especially, please explain to me, at $50 trillion, with an interest rate likely around 5% minimum, how does this country pay a $2.5 trillion interest expense yearly when right now, last year was our best year ever when we took in $5 trillion in tax revenue? It's inconceivable. It's impossible. Life and how the country would run as we knew it would cease to exist. And it's now within a reasonable time frame. And then the second part of the question I would ask those people is, what kind of percentage do you give that the people currently in charge can come to some sort of decision-making that can at least ease that, stop it, or even reverse it? And I think that number is zero. And therefore, as I said, within a fairly soon time, that's going to be within reason now for most people, we are going to be facing a dire situation unlike anything this country's ever faced. And it's almost as certain as we know we're eventually going to pass. And I don't see any easy or palatable solution that this country is prepared to take for that. And I think other countries recognize that and is going to accelerate that program, because in order to keep borrowing money, they're going to want a higher interest rate to compensate for the risk of not getting their money back.
It really does seem like the situation could spin out of control. As you mentioned, as the trustworthiness maybe of the U.S. falls, then the interest rate just has to rise, making the issue worse. So you mentioned how this could be a catastrophe for the U.S. What do you really see this looking like in the coming years and decades?
Well, I think only right now, most people outside the United States are the people seeing it. That's why, for instance, the BRIC movement is one of the many reasons it's occurred, because they realized that the United States is not only not the economic powerhouse that it once was, but it's an empire falling apart. They also recognize that since it is the principle of the world's reserve currency, that something alternatively or in addition to it needs to be done. And that's why I think there's such physical buy-in of gold by central banks. I've said all along, they are not buying it for a trade or speculation. They're buying it because of a monetary or monetarily related reasons. And therefore, if they recognize that and they continue to do this, irregardless of what may be happening with prices in the last few weeks or what have you and all, I would suggest to people that unless you are in the very high 1 or 2%, it is going to fall on the shoulders of the working class, as it always does. You know, Elijah, just sidetrack just a little. America has always tried to help people less fortunate within its country. And somewhere, sometimes as much as 10 or 15% of the population needs some sort of support aid. And we've always had that mechanism, and we didn't have an issue having it. The difficulty now is that more people are getting in that wagon, and the people that are left to pull, they're being just beaten up by the government. They're not getting support. They're making it even more difficult to pull, to a point where you want to say, hey, I like to get in the wagon too. And now we multiply that, because we literally have, it'll be well over 10 million people, heading towards 20 million, of people coming to also to a country with nothing but their shirts on their back, that are also going to look to be in that wagon, which is only going to make the wagon pulling harder. Now, as a Catholic Christian man, I'm not about to abandon that. I believe I'm called upon to help, but there's only so far one can go. And the country now has surpassed any reasonable expectation that it can fix this situation without going through a very dire situation. The only $64,000 question is, will it be through an inflationary process or a tough austerity deflationary process? I don't think the American society now, unlike our parents and grandparents who had to go through a depression, would would stand for that, that would take those hard times for any long period. So the end result will be it'll be extremely inflationary. It'll be a package deal of renegotiating, reneging, and inflating some or part of that debt to where at least the interest can be serviced. And none of that is good for general economics.
It's definitely not good for general economics. It seems like, yeah, as you mentioned, really the two options are to suffer deflation or for the Fed just to continue to inflate the system. It seems like time and time again they choose inflation, and it's really a hidden tax on the public, isn't it? Because it hurts the public, but they don't know where it's coming from, and the government can always blame something else. It's this war, it's that war that's causing higher prices, when in reality, the root of the problem is the Fed creating more and more currency.
Yeah. And two things about that. First, I wanted to say comes to mind is it's like putting on weight. We got away with putting weight, and the Fed would put more weight on by creating this money. But there gets a point at a time where you put on too much, and then some of the ways of being able to even take it off can't occur because you have so much weight. That's what's happened. But I think the other thing that we have to recognize is that there's going to be a change in the monetary system. There's no question, because history shows that no currency ever stays forever the world reserve currency. So the BRICS are going to form something. Now, whether they just simply form a commodity-based index, trading just among themselves, gold as a partial backing of it, whatever it may be, it'll be an alternative. And it'll also be in addition to what already has been occurring, and that is there's been a lessening ownership of dollars as each year goes by. Well, Elijah, those dollars are going to have to go somewhere. They're going to come back here. More dollars chasing fewer and fewer products, inflationary. So all these people in the just don't worry, be happy crowd that makes up much of Wall Street. Oh, inflation is going to return back and it'll be 1 or 2%, and you should buy bonds and all this kind of stuff. That may work for a year, might even work for 2. But somewhere between 5 and 10 years from now, it's not going to work. And most people have no preparation mentally, physically, or financially for what is now, I think, within reason of an expectation that 20 years ago, people in the hard asset community spoke about, but it was off in the distance. Now it's in front of our eyes.
I know we recently saw another, it was a small bank crash this last week or so. Your perspective on the banking system right now, how the banking system is going to fare during these tough times ahead. It seems like if interest rates rise any more, we could just start seeing more and more issues.
I forget the exact number, so forgive me for not having it, but there's many hundreds of billions of dollars of paper losses in banks now because they bought that paper that the Federal Reserve kept issuing out there when interest rates were 1% and 2%, and now they're 4 and 5. Now, if you believe that interest rates were artificially driven down and we're not in the position to flood the markets, the Federal Reserve certainly is not in the position to buy bonds anytime soon as they were, and they were half the market. You have to ask, how do those holdings ever turn profitable again? So the banking system has to, if I'm in the banking system and I've talked to bankers, they are doing what's next best they can. And that's they're tightening their rates. They're tightening credit. We're seeing credit being tightened. Loans that are coming up for renewal are not going to have some of the great terms they might have had before. And all those things are negative for the economy. But I think the bigger question is, and what should be asked is, in this most recent crisis, this terrible war that's going on in the Middle East, we saw something that we hadn't seen for much of my career. Normally, when something like that broke out, there was always a tremendous rally into bonds, especially T-bonds and the dollar. Neither one rallied. And while you can say, well, gold didn't go through the moon either, It never went through the moon. It was always the dollar. So I think people have now taken the first step. They're moving away from the dollar and the bonds. And I'm talking about serious money around the world, not the average investor at this point. By the time the average investor is doing it, the move is basically over already. But the next go around, when things become more apparent, because here's what they're going to do, in my opinion, Elijah. They're going to get together again, and they're going to push the debt limit into 2024. And they're going to infight. And the political scene is so bad. I know this is hard for people to believe, but even the two people that look like they're going to be the people to run for president, Biden and Trump, may not end up that way within a year. That's how radical things could change and so forth and so on. And I just think, and I'm going to get to singing to the choir because it's your business, not mine. I don't sell gold. You and I don't have any relation. I don't get anything from you other than, hi, Pete, how are you? But I'm just going to tell you this much. People have to start now. You have health insurance. You have car insurance. You have home insurance. You need investment insurance. Too many people still that come into our planning group are just so overweighted in financial assets and have nothing to insure themselves if for some reason markets and bonds and stocks don't do as well as their financial guys from the Don't Worry, Be Happy crowd keep telling them. And I keep telling them the same thing. You need to own some gold and pray to God it doesn't go up. And they all say the same thing. Why do I want to buy something that's not going to go up? Because if it does, your financial assets went down. So I think for 2024, and I know this is your area and your world, but I really think gold and things related to gold, silver, need for people that don't own any to own it. Listen, I forget what the world number is. It's something like 67% have dollars, and only about 7% in banks have about gold. And that's increasing. That's going to go well over 10%. Because the Russians, India, China, they're just net selling, getting out of our paper. They're getting out of T-bonds and all. And where are they going to go? They're not going to go to the euro. They're not going to go to the yen. That's why they're buying the gold. And that's going to continue. So I really think your time in the sun, is coming. And I think if people don't grasp that, and can I make another important point? Because I learned this the hard way. I'm suffering for the first time in 40 years being on the wrong side of a vicious bear market. And that's occurring in mining shares and things related to that. And we had an old saying that you can't say anymore. In my first 30 years or so, all the people in mining shares and newsletter writers used to say this: owning mining shares is like owning gold. Wrong. We learned that in the last 12 months because gold was $1,650 in 2022, and I'd be glad to have it at $1,950 right now. But whenever basically mining shares you had in 2022, they're a lot lower now. So that's another side vent. I know it's not your business, but there are people probably watching this. It was a hard lesson to learn. But when we talk about owning gold, we're talking about owning the physical bullion, not mining shares or some paper proxy.
I know mining shares can give you leverage sometimes to the gold price. Obviously, as you mentioned, maybe this last year, we haven't seen that in a lot of them. But I mean, it is an interesting argument. Then it seems like a lot of them probably are even more undervalued today than what they were a couple of years ago. So for those people who have this, the stomach, who can maybe experience some volatility and are okay with that, it may be a fantastic opportunity right now to, get some deals there. Your perspective on that?
Yeah, there's no question. I put out things as much as people probably throwing darts at a picture of me right about now. This will turn, and it will turn in a big way, and there is tremendous opportunity. But what I was just trying to make is, don't treat that as owning physical bullion. It's two different things. That's a capital appreciation or depreciation play. Gold is a monetary investment protection insurance play, and that's the difference. And you're right. If we do get fortunate and gold moves to 2,500 or 3,000, several of those mining companies, especially that produce it, should do better. And of course, by making more money, because their costs are basically going to stay the same, but their bottom line is going to increase a lot. But what I always wanted to talk about is too many people have no protection to their financial assets, both stocks and bonds. Think about this. Now, bonds could keep rallying and maybe squeak out a small gain this year, but right now they're down for the third year in a row. That's the first time in history. And I'm telling you, we went back 3 years ago when I told people to get out of bonds. You wouldn't have found 2% of financial advisors telling people to sell bonds, because it was unheard of to think that the bond market could lose 3 years in a row. So I think the time has come with all the things that are happening socially, politically, and economically here and abroad, that if you find yourself with no ownership of gold, I just think you have to.
And before we let you go, Peter, I do want to discuss one other topic that I like discussing with you, obviously the faith. I think in these trying times, it can be difficult, not only financially, but also spiritually, to understand, why does God allow these things to happen? How do people stay strong in their faith and strengthen their faith in these tough times?
Well, you're right. To me, it's by far the most important thing for me. I've worn it on my sleeve for almost half of my career. It's somewhat detrimental to business at times because you get accused of being a charlatan and all these other things. But I also think that we need to look at the times we live in. Polls now show that about half of Americans now are agnostic or atheists. And I think that's very critical for us that come from families of faith and maintain that has changed decision-making and how people are approaching ways. And you have to take that into your calculations in everyday life, social life, financial, business, what have you. I think the challenge is when you don't think there's anything more than this, you can get really riled up about what's happening because everything is this. If you're like I believe you and I are, that we believe this is a stepping stone to something that can either be unbelievably great for eternity or maybe end up in a place that a million zillion times worse than the worst bear market you could possibly be in. When that weighs on you, that is a good sign because you have at least some consciousness. Society seems to be a lot more people without a conscience. That's how I describe what's happening now. People are doing things to other people and other factors without any moral conviction. I don't even think you had to be any one religion. Just it's a good thing. And I'll close on this. Someone said to me today, of all days, before I did this interview with you at lunch, we were talking about this, and they said, Pete, what if you're wrong? What if there is no God or anything? And I'm not the original person with this answer. The person that first told me this was my best friend ever, who was a Catholic evangelist for 25 years and passed too early. He used to say, it's still a better way to live. And I think it's going to be more of a challenge for us, for those that have faith, because it's not as easy. We're not yet at some places in the world, Elijah, where if you openly practice your faith, particularly a Christian faith, you could be killed. I mean, that is happening. But it's getting to the point where it may not be something you want to jump up in a subway or something and scream, thank you, Jesus. And that's going to be a challenge for us. But we were told in the book of life, the manual to life, Holy Scripture, that day will face us, that, if they hated him, they're going to hate us. And that's the challenge, because I see it in business. This type of conversation you're allowing me to have, and one of the main reasons why I'm so happy to come on with you. There'll be some people that will watch this and go, he's just saying that so he can pump some mining stock. I mean, I get that. I get the emails. I even had a death threat. I joked that I need a couple more before we have a bottom. But the bottom line is, I couldn't imagine wanting to live without that faith and confidence in a Lord and Savior. I couldn't imagine what it would be to want to get up tomorrow, as tough as it may be, if it wasn't for the fact that I'm working towards something that's much, much more important. And at the end, there's nothing in this world that could even remotely come close to what it'd be like to be in heaven. So it's a challenge, and I think it's going to get difficult, but I think the time has come. And listen, Scripture is a preview of the future. Now, maybe for those that haven't, want to dust off that book and kind of read it, we were told that this is not going to be a party. This was not just because we find this faith that we live happily ever after. That Christian prosperity group that basically exists in the Protestant community, that's worse than having no religion. To think that God just wants you to get rich and be a preacher and have a $10 million, $20 million plane and $10 million homes, that isn't what God is all about. So sorry if I went on there, Elijah, but you asked me and I felt I needed to answer you.
No, I think that's fantastic. And I mean, you open up the old book, right? And read about Jesus and how, his life was definitely not a walk in the park, especially the end of it there. But the other side of the other side is the resurrection, right? So we can't forget about, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of chaos in this life, but we have to realize that there's a resurrection at the end of all this, and the suffering can be redeemed. And I think that's so important. And we all have to have a God in our life, right? Either it's going to be the one true God, or we're going to make, a God out of, our own will or something like that and choose our own path. And that's very boring if we just do what we want to do. I think living for the glory of God is way more interesting.
For someone that, I'm 67, if I learned anything in all of my faith, it's not how you come in, it's how you go out. So the evil one will beat you down and say, oh, because of what you did, you could never earn God's love or anything of that nature. And there's a lot of people walking around like that. And that's why they become agnostic and all, because they look around and go, well, God, how could you allow this? Well, how do we allow our children to fall? I had children. I knew it was important to fall. I knew it was important for her to touch the oven so she knows not to touch the oven again versus just keeping her hand away from the oven. And God lets us learn a lot from our falls. And I can just tell you, after going through yet another trial in my life, I've come out better on the other side. Now, I don't wish to go through one more trial so I can come out that much better, but God makes good out of everything. Romans teaches us that. It's a great teaching that those who have faith and confidence in God, you'll come out better on the other side, even if that other side is not necessarily here, but in a much better place.
All right. Well, Peter, we really appreciate your time today. If people are interested in learning more, where can they find you?
Well, those that still want to talk to me after our discussion, I'll be glad to be reached. They can find me on my website, petergrandich.com. I like to spend most of my time now using Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And I also have a YouTube channel. You can just put my name, Peter Grandich, in a Google search and it'll come out.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless you too.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.